Hello and welcome to Real Life English Essay Samples with me. My name is Rose and I am so happy and honored to explain exactly what this series is going to be about. And so let's just go ahead and get started with this really important question. So what do students need to write a perfect essay? And of course this is going to be a question that a lot of parents are going to be asking and a lot of teachers will be expecting their students to be able to respond to over the course of several years. Now I would say that the answer to this particular question is this. They would need guidance and examples. Oftentimes, nobody will be able to write an essay so perfectly just simply in a bubble. Oftentimes, essays have to be written based on other essays we've read, as well as the essays that we will be seeing going through our lives, especially in academia. And so, what better way to learn how to write the perfect essay than to have somebody give guidance as well as examples too, in order to show us exactly what it is that we need to use in our essays. And so here we're going to be talking about every essay you will need for school, particularly for middle and high school, all in one place. And so bringing all these together, this is that series that's going to be explaining how to write that perfect essay. Again, depending on that assignment, it's going to be there for your perusal. So ready to use real essays, tips and tricks to enter the top 10% in your English class. One really important part about this is that this series in particular will be discussing how to get into that 10%. The way that we do this though is going to be very interesting in the sense that we don't just simply memorize certain kinds of sentences, we don't memorize certain kinds of formats, but we make sure that we adjust and adapt and evolve as necessary in order to get that grade that we want. Again, we want to show evolution, we want to show growth, and so this series is going to create that foundation for the student, particularly to go ahead and do that said involvement. And so here, this is the guidance that we are wanting to think about. So why do students need guidance in the first place? Oftentimes, essay writing is very difficult for students, even for native speakers. I have seen this time and time again. Oftentimes, people will think that if you're a native speaker, you're a good essay writer. And that's not necessarily the case. Additionally, we also have the issue that people oftentimes don't know where to begin. Do we start with the sentence? Do we start with the structure? Do we start with the idea? All these questions are very valid. However, it's not necessarily going to be super easy to just get into an essay and start writing it very cohesively. Again, it's a very long process to learn how to write the perfect essay. And additionally, on top of this question, why do students here need this kind of series? Why do we need to be thinking about guidance? Well, we also have this issue too. English education in Korea does not oftentimes meet the scholastic standards that exist in America. Oftentimes, when we're looking at international schools, we have English courses and English classes that do have some kind of similarity to these scholastic American courses. However, I would say there is a little bit of a difference. There is the assumption that English levels and fluency and comprehension is not quite the same. However, if we're talking about a student going to the United States and studying, that's exactly the kind of essay writing we are trying to aim for and trying to assume on our own selves. And so that is the reason why we were looking at this idea of guidance, why we need so much guidance, in particular for essay writing. So students need guidance to explain where they need to improve in their writing, and also this will allow students to write at a higher standard than that of their peers. When we're talking about guidance as well, we need to be able to have the student look back on their essays and also understand what part exactly do I need to go ahead and fix to create that A+ essay. Again, that guidance is what's going to allow them to acknowledge that, to see that, and to understand that maybe if I fix this one thing, I'll be able to write better than the majority of my class, and again, assume that top-ranking position in terms of writing in courses. And so why do students then need examples? If we're going based off of this secondary question, more essays to learn and adopt tactics from, and also we can perfect essays. Speaking here about a goal to achieve, when we're talking about this idea of learning and adopting tactics from, again, we do not write essays in a bubble. It's very difficult to go ahead and start writing and simply look at the prompt and then write without thinking about the other essays we've written before. Usually we have a style, but to find that style, now that's a little bit difficult. And so we want to learn and adopt tactics from other very successful essays. That way we can use them, not necessarily memorize them or copy them, but rather to build on them, to use them as the foundation for those good sentences. And then talking about that goal to achieve, again, a perfect essay is going to be very difficult to achieve, but if we want to perfect it, if we want to make it the best that we can, we want to use that as our aspiration, as our goal in mind while we're going through this series. Additionally, edited essays, ways they can fix their own writing, and by the end, we will be seeing how it is done by other writers. And so when we're talking about edited essays as well, we want to be looking at the way that they can reflect on their own stuff and see, okay, as long as I can fix this, again, I'll be able to get that good score that I want. And because all these essay samples will be coming from other students of the same age, of the same period, we're going to be seeing how they too can emulate this kind of style. We can show that they have the ability to write in the exact same manner and get the exact same score. So students need examples to see how they can write now and how they can improve. And so we need that difference as well. We want to emphasize that difference, that the way that they're writing and the way that they could be writing, it's such a big difference that if they see that difference, they will also be able to reflect upon themselves and see what exactly it is that they need to personally improve on. And additionally, adopt writing tactics and skills that would not have been seen in Korean-based English education. And this is probably one of the most important points specifically for this series that you will not find anywhere else. We are trying not to succeed in the sense of doing well in an international school or trying to fit into Korean scholastic standards. No, we are trying to fit into American scholastic standards, trying to emulate the fact that, there are essays out there that are very similar to the ones that our students will be writing, particularly that exist in America. Again, native-like fluency, native-like writing. And so guidance and examples when we're talking about this, the teaching and tactics that we will be looking at will be essay types and writing styles, weak vocabulary transitions, and creating fluent writing. Again, looking at all these styles, using them as a foundation to figure out what exactly that we want to achieve, along with weak vocabulary. This also tends to be a very big issue for many students. This might be because they use too simple of words and the complexity starts to dwindle by the time they get into middle or high school. And again, that is where we start to drop in terms of scholastic levels. Additionally, we have transitions and creating fluent writing. I feel that transitions and fluent writing definitely go hand in hand. Fluent writing, being able to go from one topic to the next, is contingent on transitions and being able to connect ideas smoothly and efficiently. And so essays are always a struggle for students, no matter how good they might be in class. The student can be an A+ student who does really well on vocabulary and when asked comprehension questions does really well. However, every single student, that I have ever run into will always have at some point or another an issue writing essays because, again, it's a very big learning curve. It's very difficult for many students. And so when we're talking about essay writing, we want to be thinking about the 3 R's of writing. And this is going to be something that we reiterate in this series. To rethink the information that we have, to reflect on the information that we have, and to reconstruct it. So this would also be to summarize it or to put it in our own words. Thinking about the 3 R's in this manner, as we're writing our essay, we'll be able to cohesively and, of course, efficiently put our ideas together for an essay that will be acceptable and very substantial in terms of grades for our student. Additionally, critical thinking occurs in essays, and this is a very big part as well. Oftentimes, it is a reflection of the way that a student thinks. And this is where we can also see this skill set being used in AP, IB, honors, advanced, and university level courses. And so it's not simply for middle and high school students, but rather it will go further than that too. And because this is English taught in both theory and practice, we're going to be seeing this not only talked about in the way that a student might think about the writing, but also how they can actually physically and palpably do so as well. And so the objective of this lecture series is to discuss 60 different types of essays of various types and all at different levels, breaking it down from beginner to intermediate and then advanced. And again, once more, I would like to reiterate that these are all student-written essays. Not one of them has been written by a teacher. Again, these are all real-life student essays. And so these are some of the essay types that are covered in the lecture series. And so we will be talking about narrative, descriptive essays, persuasive, argumentative, book report, critical analysis, TOEFL independent essays, as well as the college application. Now, by the time we get to the college application, we'll be looking at the statement of purpose here. And so as we can see, we start off with essays that are very common, specifically in middle school, and end even with the last essay you will be writing when you're in high school. And so seeing such a variety variety, I think that this is going to be a very comprehensive series, particularly for that student. And once more, I would like to also reiterate that we will be talking specifically about persuasive, argumentative, book report, and TOEFL independent essays, all essays that are incredibly popular, especially for our students and their teachers. So the question is then, why this lesson plan in particular? What's so important about this one compared to all the other ones? Well, students need sample essays to learn and understand how to write better for class. And we want to emphasize how to understand and how an essay can receive an A+ grade one lecture at a time. Again, we're going to take this slow. We're going to take this one step at a time and use each example to see what's good, what's bad, what do we need to improve on, and if we feel like we're seeing ourselves in this essay, what it is that we need to be using and maybe also implementing to get that really good grade. So the entire course will also be performed fully in English, as I am explaining now, enhancing effectiveness of the lessons as well as comprehension, reading, and responding. Again, I believe that when we're talking about English production, which would be speaking or writing, it's really important to also hear it. That way we can understand sentence structure as well as flow and fluency. And so to reiterate that and to emphasize that, I will be performing this entire series all in English for the students' benefit. And so when we're talking about who exactly this student might be, this is a series that is open for all students who need help writing essays for class. And this could be anybody from middle school, high school, to even university level, depending on what it is that you would like to accomplish. This is also a companion lecture to English Writing Essentials for middle school. So if you have seen that series already, this is going to be a really good additional supplementary material for your student to be looking at and understanding, again, a bit more about how to write for classes. And so, essays for all topics, themes, content for any student wanting to improve writing quality, at the end of the day, this is who it is designed for. Anybody who wants to work on essays, specifically academic essays, that could range anywhere from middle school level to university level, this is the series for you. And so again, the necessity for the course falls like this. See how other writers write hundreds of words on topics like, what is a fond memory of yours? Books on 1984, The Great Gatsby, Romeo and Juliet, Frankenstein, Animal Farm, and more. And also, when we're talking about the way that we're going to be looking at this series, we want to also know that there are reviews every unit and key takeaways every single lecture. So at the end of every single lecture, I will be highlighting what is the most important part? What is something that we can take away from this specific episode, from this specific video, that we're going to be using for our other essays as well? And so keeping this in mind, we also have a breakdown at the end that will emphasize, again, the key point or the key takeaway of each lesson. And so this is a little bit about myself. I am currently a teacher who is working specifically with international students and overseas students as well. As we can see with the other classes I have taught before, dealing with TOEFL, SAT, essay writing, and university entrance exams, alongside, of course, college application essays. And additionally, I would also like to note that I am a native English speaker as well. I grew up in the United States, and I also received my high school diploma from the States as well. And that was only until I moved to Korea to get my degree in English Language and Literature from Korea University, graduating with great honors. And very recently, I have also received my master's in Literary and Cultural Studies from Carnegie Mellon University. And currently as well, I am going to be in my PhD program, studying the same program, Literary and Cultural Studies, on Contemporary American Studies alongside diaspora, post-colonialism, and decoloniality. And so to sum this all up, and we're going to be summarizing this, what is the main point we want to take away too? Well, this is a variety of real-life English essay samples explained that you won't find anywhere else. And I truly mean that as well. We're going to be talking about nuances. We're going to be talking about the way that a native speaker tends to write, not necessarily somebody who is a second language learner. And so creating that difference, seeing that difference and seeing how real students write, students your age, that is going to be the thing that helps us understand exactly what we need to do to edit our own papers and also what to keep in mind as we're writing them. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys in class soon. Welcome back, you guys. We're going to be talking about narrative essays now. So for today, real-life English essay examples, beginner narrative 1. That is going to be the essay we're going to be discussing today. So a little bit of background on this essay before we begin. We need to have a few things in mind. So the first thing is narrative essay. This essay specifically is 500 words long. It's 5 paragraphs and it is written in the first person as it should be. First person perspective being, of course, I, me, my, oftentimes talking about the self, personal experience, and so this is quite fitting. And the topic is thinking back on the first day of 8th grade. A little thing we want to pay attention to for today's essay is adjectives and sentence structure. This is something we want to keep in mind when we're looking at this essay. Whether or not it's good or bad, only time will tell, but something we want to keep an eye out for. So a little bit extra is that details you might want to mention when you are writing an essay of this type of nature, thinking back on the first day of 8th grade. What do we want to mention here? Well, we want to mention taste, touch, hear, see, smell. We want to talk about the things that we experienced when we had this day. Why? Because we're thinking back on it. We are recollecting our experience, as well as feelings, as well as thoughts and emotions from that time. It's important that we really try to dig up all those thoughts, all those memories, and really put them on paper. And lastly, what are narrative essays? Again, we've already discussed what they might be, but let's talk about them in a bit more detail. Narrative essays are essentially stories that are told from your point of view or your perspective. These words are interchangeable. Often assigned, so you will most likely have to write a few. Now, when I say a few, I mean you will probably have to write several of these over the course of your academic career. Reason being, it's one of the more easier essays to assign, and it gets the teacher to know about a little bit more about you as a person, you as a person who goes on breaks, goes on vacation, has hobbies. Oftentimes, these questions can be very different and have quite a big variety, so you will never see this specific prompt most likely, but quite similar other prompts. But all in all, the most important thing we need to remember here is that a narrative essay is mostly just going to ask you about a past experience, what you felt, how you felt, if there was a conflict, and how did it get resolved. Think of it as a short story, your life as a short story. Feel free to make it dramatic, but you also don't want to make it hyperbolic, exciting, but also not unrealistic. Now, to expand on this, hyperbolic being, our hyperbole when we're talking about our literary terms, this is something that we don't want to do. We don't want to over-exaggerate anything. When we are talking about a narrative, we're talking about something realistic. While it can be dramatic, it has to be realistic. So don't try to make anything up. There's no need to do that. It can be just a simple day going to the grocery store, but just be specific and use your details, and that's going to be plenty to get you an A. No need to make it fun and exciting in the way that you might have to assume. And also, exciting but not unrealistic. Again, we don't want to make it unrealistic because then we'd just be lying to our readers, which is something we don't want to do. But we can always make it exciting with a bit of drama. So we're going to be seeing how that happens. And also always mention what you learned during the experience. This is the last point that is something a lot of students tend to forget in our narrative essays. Reason being, when we talk about ourselves, we just talk about a personal experience and then we're done. However, when we're talking about short stories, novels, novellas, books, they're pretty much the exact same thing, just in a longer form. So what's the difference here? In books, in short stories, there's always a theme. What is the theme? What is the thing that the characters learn at the very end? Same thing for you. You are the main character, so you need to show what you learned in your experience. And so this can be quite a challenge, and we're going to be seeing a few that don't actually get that done as we're talking about our 5 narrative essays. However, in this one, I would say that it's okay. I think this one does it quite well. So just keep that in mind when you're writing your narrative essays, and always remember that you did learn something. What is it that you learned? Recollect on it and write it down. So let's talk about our first paragraph. We're going to be reading these through together and then discussing parts that we can be fixing together or parts that we might want to just keep an eye out for. For me, my final year of middle school symbolized the beginning of the end, but also the start of a new beginning. I woke up stretching over to switch off my buzzing alarm clock. It was my first day of grade 8, but it was also my last year before high school. Now here we have our introductory paragraph. which means we still need a hook. Just because it's a narrative doesn't mean that we don't need a hook. We still need a hook, which is dramatic. It has quite a strong claim, and as you can see, I've bolded it for us here. It shows us feelings of nervousness. It shows us feelings of excitement and stresses importance. Details and adjective usage. So let's talk about the hook for a second here. I quite like this hook a lot, actually. In fact, there's a reason for that being that it's dramatic, it explains a lot, and we get all the information that we quite need immediately off the first sentence. It's the beginning of the end. 8th grade. Middle school in America ends at 8th grade, so it's the beginning of the end, but also started a new beginning because it's a new year. Makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety, but we have a feeling that everything's going to be okay because the writer, ends it with the start of a new beginning. Then we also have details on adjective usage here, stretching and buzzing. This person could have just simply written, I woke up and turned off my alarm clock. How boring of a sentence is that? We don't want that. We want to add adjectives when we can. Stretching over to the switching off my buzzing alarm clock. We want to use these words that have more meaning, more detail in them when we can, okay? So try to toss them in every now and then, and it'll actually elevate your essay way more than you actually might think it might. I glanced out my window, watching as the large glowing sun rose into the dull morning sky, admiring the colors made by the rising sun. I snapped out of my thoughts as my mother called for my brother, letting him know he would be late if he stayed in bed any longer. Now this is still the first paragraph, but I think this one's quite good as well. Looked versus glance, parallel structure, and usage of the word snapped. Let's look at look versus glance. Okay, the first verb that we see, I glanced out my window. I looked out my window. There's quite a difference here of the nuance. We could easily say looked out the window, but why does this person use glanced? Because it is a subtle movement and I can feel it. It's important, again, that we use the proper words. Large glowing, dull morning, admiring, rising. We have all these really good adjective phrases and we have all these really good descriptive verbs that this writer is using. Something that we want to strive for as well, and our parallel structure, which is large glowing, dull morning. We have this repetitive structure which really stands out to us as the readers. And of course, usage of the word snapped. This is quite a strong verb here, but I personally like this quite a lot as well because it really is an abrupt jolt. Snapped. Something that, we kind of get surprised by. So we need to have that implication when we're talking about thoughts, mother calling out, because, if our mother calls out, we always go, So we want to put that into words. How do we do that? We use the word snapped. Second paragraph. As the clock hit 7:50, I stood up, getting off of my bed and placing one foot after another. I stopped in front of my dresser to put on my outfit that was neatly placed on top, just the way I had left it the night prior. Then, pleased with my appearance, I walked downstairs, grabbing my bag and placing both straps over my shoulders before leaving out the front door. Here we're going to be looking at the use of modifiers. Modifiers being our descriptive phrases that are put in the middle of sentences, in the front and the end, depending on how you want to write it. That just gives us a little bit extra detail that we probably would not have known had we not written it down here. So we have our little modifier here. We have our modifier here. We have our modifier here. What does this show us? Well, it gives us a little bit more detail, a little bit more explanation. And this writer actually does our modifiers quite well in giving the reader a better, clearer picture of what actually happened to them when they were experiencing this 8th grade morning. Opening the door, I had noticed the sky had opened up to a soft light blue as a slight breeze brushed past my cheeks. It was pleasantly warm, with everything on the ground soaking in the sunlight that made it look like there were diamonds sparkling on top of the trees and grass. Here, modifiers again, metaphors, and descriptive phrases. Again, let's just take a look and just imagine, while closing your eyes, how a sky might have opened up to a soft light blue, and suddenly a slight breeze brushed past my cheeks. Okay, you guys, now we are on to a different style of essay, more specifically our argumentative essay. Now, we are now switching into a different gear, so I need you guys to just kind of put the narrative essays in the back of your mind, because now we're going to be talking about a style that is much, much different than the narrative. So, argumentative essay, today's example is going to be 588 words, 5 paragraphs, and written in the third-person perspective, talking about collegiate sports, or in other words, college sports. And pay attention to this essay's use of a concession and vocabulary. Now, a little bit more about the background of this essay. Argumentative essays need facts, statistics, examples, and do not rely on personal opinion. I'm going to be talking about this in a bit more detail, but that's generally what we want to be discussing and we want to be using in our argumentative essays for a number of reasons. But a little bit more about the actual background of the argumentative essay itself. It requires the reader to take a stance on a topic and defend their perspective or their point of view. Here, these words are interchangeable, and this is happening and does so by facts, quotes, journals, articles, statistics, reports, etc. So what do I mean by all of these examples? Well, this means that you have to go out into the world, whether it be books or the internet or whatever the case may be, and find proof that what you're arguing is the correct answer to whatever the question might be. Now, the way I'm saying it is a bit confusing, but when you have a topic like collegiate sports or otherwise, then all you have to really do is focus on what argument you want to take in this prompt. And by doing that, you will be able to substantiate your claims with examples as proof. Of course, if you're trying to make an argument, you need to have proof or some kind of example to show, hey, if this is what's happening, then there's a reason why this should happen instead. In that way, that's our goal for writing an argumentative essay and creates an evidence-based argument that should leave the reader on your side. Now, this means that you shouldn't say, hey, you should come to my side and agree with me because I'm correct and leave it at that. No, you should prove to them that this is the correct answer, which makes the reader think to themselves, there is no other correct answer other than what this person has written for me here. With that, argumentative essays can be quite difficult. However, they are doable and is going to be one of the more popular essays, especially if you guys are in high school or university. This is one of those essays that you have to do over and over and over again, in the same way that a narrative essay is something that you would do over and over again in middle school. So if you guys are in high school or university, I'd really focus in on this one, okay? Make sure you pay attention a lot to the argumentative essay. And also, if you guys are in middle school as well, you're probably going to have to write one of these as well. So focus on what is most important for an argumentative essay, especially for this one, because this one is quite a good one. So with our first paragraph, let's begin. As college sports continue to be hugely popular and the National Collegiate Athletic Association, NCAA, brings in large amounts of revenue, people have revived the debate on whether college athletes should get paid for their participation in games. Here, we have our acronym and we have a clear and concise hook. Let's talk more about the hook before we get into that acronym here. The hook explains exactly what the essay will be about in one sentence. It's quite a long sentence, but it's very clear, it's very straightforward, and with that, we understand what's going on and what the argument is going to be, which is that people have revived the debate, the back and forth between whether college athletes should be paid for their participation in games. What does this infer? That they are currently not being paid for their games and for their participation. Also, let's talk about the acronym here. Spell it out once, then use the shortened version. A lot of times we have these big words, these long string of words or a phrase that represents something else, or a committee, some kind of association. We see these things quite often, even in the TOEFL or the TOEIC or the TOPIC. Those are all acronyms for the actual exams. SAT, AP, IB, those are all acronyms as well. So what we want to do is we want to spell it out for whoever the reader is in the very beginning. The first time we mention it, remember this, the first time we mention whatever it has that acronym, we need to write every single word out. If we're talking about AP, we need to write Advanced Placement. If we're talking about IB, we need to write International Baccalaureate. After that, in parentheses, we'll put the acronym, so whatever it is going to stand in for. So here in this instance, we have the NCAA, we have IB, AP, and then after that, you don't have to write everything out again. Instead, you can just use the acronym, and that will lead the reader back to this point if they end up forgetting what it might mean. This is also really important because a lot of times, again, we assume that whoever's reading it understands exactly what we're talking about. If I had, for instance, just left up NCAA and left it that way, a lot of us wouldn't understand what that means or what it might stand for. So it's really important that we write it out. That way we understand at least a little bit about what's going on. In the second paragraph, it begins by saying, proponents of the idea believe that because college athletes are the ones who are training, participating in games, and bringing in audiences, student athletes should receive some sort of compensation for their work. If there were no college athletes, the NCAA would not exist. College coaches would not receive their high salaries, and brands like Nike could not profit from college sports. If, then, transition creates a cause and effect argument style. If something happens, then this is the result. This is a very good way of at least posing an argument for the reader who is now coming to terms with what's going on. So, in this instance, we have proponents of the idea believe that if these are the cases of what's happening, then students should receive some sort of compensation. Here, compensation is taking place of the word money, funding, payment for their work. And of course, over here, we have our acronym NCAA. We don't have to write it out again. In fact, the NCAA brings in roughly $1 billion in revenue a year, but college athletes do not receive any of that money in the form of a paycheck. Additionally, people who believe college athletes should be paid state that paying college athletes will actually encourage them to remain in college longer and not turn pro as quickly. So here we have our first instance of a concrete detail and our factual statement, which is the foundation for a strong argumentative essay. It's really important for argumentative essays in particular that we know exactly what we're talking about, our quotations, our statistics, whatever the case may be, that we are confident in them, we are proud of them, and we are using them in the right way. So here our concrete detail would be this area right here. Brings in roughly $1 billion in revenue a year, but college athletes do not receive any of that money in the form of a paycheck. Here, our concrete detail would be the fact that they bring in roughly $1 billion in revenue a year. Now, this has to be substantiated with some sort of citation, I would say, and we need some kind of proof that they're not making this kind of information up, which is something we're going to be talking about in a bit more detail. But for now, I would argue that this is a very good concrete detail, especially for this point that this student is trying to make. Also, they are using a lot of transitions, which I am super proud of course. In fact, additionally, adding on to the fact that this is their concrete detail, in fact, making a claim, you know what, this is an example that I want to show, and for a fact, let me tell you some important information. That's what that transition is doing in that moment. And so, in the second paragraph, we can say that this is a very good example of how to frame a concrete detail, or, in other words, a piece of irrefutable fact, okay? Then, second paragraph, continuing on, this is by giving them a way to begin earning money in college or requiring them to sign a contract stating they will stay at the university for a certain number of years while making an agreed upon salary. Now here is the other part of the essay that we need to keep in mind, especially for argumentative essays. I've been saying concrete detail a lot, and a lot of you guys might have heard of that before. Some of you guys might not have. No problem. Concrete detail is mostly just our fact. What are we trying to prove here? What is the example we are stating? That's all fine and dandy. That's easy to do because that information is not something we create, but rather something that we are taking from the internet, taking from a book, and quoting in our essay. Then what happens next? We have our commentary. Now this is something that we're going to have to focus a lot more on, especially for us as students who are writing this essay, because this is where we have to explain more about what we just said. After making a claim, you want to explain it a bit more, give additional information, how the facts can be understood, and it is necessary to support your argument. If I just simply state that, oh, these students are not getting any money out of the $1 billion that the company is making, and leave it at that, while that's perfectly understandable, there's still not a lot of information there. In fact, that's just really one sentence. So we need to have a little bit more. We need another sentence or two, especially for argumentative essays. I would argue about 2 sentences or one really long sentence that explains in detail why this is so important, why we need to focus on this. in this instance, this commentary is doing quite a good job at that. Talking about how this will actually help them stay in university, help them actually agree upon a salary, and keep them in university for a certain number of years. This is actually supporting that argument. And now we are on to the beginning of our persuasive essay lecture series part. So for today, we're going to be talking about the persuasive essay, talking about what it is, how we can understand it, and how we want to go about writing one. So for this essay, it is 372 words long, 5 paragraphs, and written in the first-person perspective. This essay is also going to be talking about why students should be given lockers. And a little note that I want to mention here is that it's not very well written. I'm just going to preface and disclose that right now just out of transparency. But it has every aspect needed to create a solid persuasive essay. So what I mean by that is the organization and the content. So every part of this essay, when we look at it as a whole, should make for a very good persuasive essay. A lot of the issues that I have with it are mostly based around the fact that it is grammatically incorrect, or sometimes just very misunderstanding and very confusing, ambiguous. And because of those reasons, I can't give it a high score in any way, shape, or form. However, I do want to stress that if you don't have an idea of what a persuasive essay is, what is necessary for a persuasive essay, this actually is a very good example of what exactly you need to make sure you have in yours to make sure you personally get an A+ instead of a score that this essay is going to receive. Now with that, let's talk a little bit more about the actual topic itself. In theory, you have everything you need for a perfect persuasive essay in this one particular. You have your reasons, you have your concession, you have your appeal to emotion, and smooth flow between topics. Everything is going to be needed, everything's going to be necessary, and for the persuasive essay in particular, let's talk more about it. Persuasive essays are more common than argumentative essays for middle school students. This is a little point I want to stress in a second. But what is the difference between argumentative and persuasive? Well, argumentative essays, as we have just discussed, really need that fact, the research, the statistic, to make sure that it gets to that argumentative level, and it has to be impersonal. However, persuasive, as I mentioned earlier, is also like a sister essay. It's a type that's very similar to, but not quite the same as argumentative for a number of reasons. We have the appeals to emotion, the personal experience, conjecture, and most importantly, it is opinionated. That is the most important part of the persuasive essay that I want you guys to take away from this lecture specifically, which is that a persuasive essay can be very opinionated. It is your opinion, okay? Keep that in mind. It is your opinion. This is where you get to shine. The question's about how you want to respond to it. And it is about how you can argue it based on your own personal thoughts and opinions. So, given a question such as, should students be given lockers? Should students not be given lockers? It depends on how you personally feel about the topic. Do you want to give students lockers or do you not want to give students lockers? Can you think of reasons for both? And that is where persuasive essays really come in and shine, because it is up to you, your own personal opinions, your own emotions towards this topic that will allow you to pick your side and give you your reasons. Now, right now you might be a little confused because we've just gone over quotations, we've just gone over citations, and we've just gone over statistics and arguments such as the facts and research and statistics that are necessary for an argumentative essay. However, going through it, you guys are going to understand, wow, this is actually easier than an argumentative essay in some ways. And a little extra note about the fact that it's going to be more assigned in middle school. As I mentioned before as well, argumentative essays are often given in high school and university level education. However, persuasive essays are actually the ones that you'll be receiving more often in middle school. Reason being, it's easier to write for a lot of students and you don't have to go through the hassle of searching up facts. At the same time, persuasive essays are very important for a lot of us because this is the basis for what we will now later come to learn as the TOEFL independent essay. And so just keep this in mind, in the back of your mind, that, okay, this is an essay style that I really need to know because it is the basis for the English exam that I most likely have to take to go into university, but also it is a companion piece almost to the argumentative essay, and sometimes they are interchangeable depending on who your teacher is. So with that being said, let's go straight into the persuasive essay. What would you think if you had to put your personal belongings in a crate and every time you turn around, something of yours were stolen? That is why I think students should have lockers. Hook is a question, of course. I've talked about this before, but it's our rhetorical question that we know the answer to it, but you're just kind of stating it to have something to say in the first place. It's good, but there are better ones out there, all right? And a better way to write it, I'd actually written in a sample sentence here, is one moment our belongings are there, the next they are missing from our crate. That's another way we can write this instead of having a question. Also, we have the stance that the student is taking. That is why I think students should have lockers. Very clear, very concise, simple, and easily understandable. There's no pretense to it, and we immediately understand that, we want lockers here. We want lockers because the student is asking, how would you feel if something of yours was stolen? Of course, we'd feel bad. That's what the question wants us to think. And so that's why we need lockers. They should have a place to protect their things, keep their things somewhere clean, and so they won't have to complain about carrying everything at once. So we have our 3 reasons for this argument in particular. Very clear: protection, sanitation, and ease of transport and personal comfort. These are going to be our 3 reasons. Also, ease of transportation and personal comfort is going to go hand in hand because having, not having to really carry your books is a personal comfort, and that's why I listed it this way. Clues to the readers that there will actually be 3 body paragraphs. How do we know this? Well, there are 3 topics. If there are 3 topics, then there will be 3 body paragraphs. Each topic should get their own body paragraph, of course, and so we can kind of get clued in that, okay, this is going to be a 5-paragraph essay. Also, a little note here that I want to mention. They use the word things a lot in this essay, and I just want to, again, remind you guys, using the word things is okay in certain contexts, but most of the time we want to be as specific as possible, which this writer is not doing at this moment. Also, they have their, of course, colloquial tone using contractions in this area, but otherwise, this is a perfectly okay way to list off their reasons for why they choose to have lockers or they want lockers in their school. Second paragraph, students should have lockers because it will stop people from stealing their stuff. For example, the children won't have to worry about their books, homework assignments, and personal belongings being stolen. Reason is good, problem with the word choice and grammar. Very good reason, very good statement to make, but there's a lack of specificity, and there's also contractions. What do they mean by stuff? Who do they mean by the word there? So, let's break this down a little bit. Of course, our contraction is our big issue. Won't, let's change that to will not, okay? It doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't take any effort, adds to our word count. We want to make sure we write that out when we can. Also, their stuff. Whose stuff? The student's stuff? A person's stuff? Let's be a bit specific here. The student's stuff. Also, stuff. We have an explanation here. Books, homework assignments, personal belongings. But we kind of want to refrain from using the word stuff. We want to refrain from using vague language like this if possible. If it was up to me, I would actually change personal belongings down here and use that up here instead. From stealing, personal belongings, period. Don't have to worry about books, homework assignments, and perhaps pencils, utilities, things like that. We can also say notebooks. We could also say pencil bags. This would also be a good way to change it out instead of having to use the words personal belongings again. But the reason why I say personal belongings up here is because it is a more generic term. A personal belonging encapsulates books and homework assignments. However, a personal belonging doesn't really have anything to do down here as being super general when it could be up here instead to replace the word stuff. Then, the reason for this is that the children will have their own lockers plus their own locks, which only they have the combination to. This will reduce cases where things are being stolen. Needs a bit more explanation, assumes that the reader knows what the writer is thinking, but it needs to be clear and more specific. If it's too general, the grade will go down. So this will reduce cases where things are being stolen. Again, we have the word things akin to the word stuff. We want to be more specific. Specificity is going to help us hone in our persuasive essay. Also, as you guys probably have noticed, there is no quotation here. There's no citation. There's no research done. This is personal opinion, personal experience. You could say that this student probably saw somebody stealing out of a crate before, and that is why they're writing about this topic in particular. So, does that make sense for a persuasive essay? Absolutely, it does. It's up to you to pick your reasoning, and you can put it in your essay and explain it the way you would like personally, so it fits into your own explanation of this topic. Third paragraph. Students should also have lockers so they will have a clean place to put their books. What I mean by this is that many desks are old, rusty, and have gum stuck under them. Suddenly, there's a little bit of a disconnect in reasoning from the intro paragraph and the third paragraph. And what I mean by that is, we've up until now been talking about crates. The hook included a crate. However, suddenly we're talking about. And so now we start with our descriptive essay portion. Now this portion is only going to be covered in 2 different lectures, but I think that's all we really need right now for the beginner category. Reason being, I think it's more important that we discuss this in our intermediate category. It's quite a difficult essay for a lot of us as English second language learners. So I think it's important that we just have an idea of what we're getting into for now and then discuss it a bit more later on. Now with that being said, our descriptive essay for today is only 409 words, 4 paragraphs long, and written in the first person perspective. This is a recollection of a memory, a summer drive to New York, and pay close attention to this essay's use of adjectives as well as their visual and tactile imagery. Now this is going to be something that we are really going to be focusing on for a descriptive essay, so let's talk a bit more about the topic itself. Difficult for ESL writers because of how fluid the writing must be. Now, above all the essays that we have discussed so far, this is probably going to be the one that we have the most difficulty with. Just straight up, I'm going to tell it to you the way it is because of how intricate it can actually be. Deceptively intricate, it will discuss analogies, metaphors, personification, and a lot of other literary devices. This is only a few of several hundreds that you might actually end up seeing in a descriptive essay. Now, that's why it's really important that we actually understand exactly what a descriptive essay is before we begin. It will require the writer to actually illustrate a scene in great detail, and this scene can be regarding an object, person, place, experience, emotion, or situation. It doesn't really matter. Anything that can be described with words might actually become a descriptive essay. And so it's very different to a narrative essay as well because the purpose is different. I'm going to be discussing this a little bit later, more specifically. But for now, what we need to understand about a descriptive essay and a narrative essay, currently their differences is that you want to use effervescent language, metaphors, adjectives, modifiers, and do not lose sight of the main purpose of the essay. That I'll explain a bit more, but easy to make a mistake as a cut and dry narrative. A narrative essay and a descriptive essay are kind of different. I wouldn't say kind of, I would actually say they're very different. But a lot of times, a lot of students tend to forget that a narrative essay might be discussing one thing and a descriptive essay might be discussing something else more specifically. So for us, what we're going to be talking about is how important it is and how we can add detail to a scene or a memory that might just be chalked up to a narrative essay. But in fact, this is a descriptive essay that looks like a narrative one. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at this because it will be talking about a past experience, giving a recollection of what exactly happened, but you'll notice that there is something quite missing and something very apparent and very present in this essay that makes it stand apart. So this is the first paragraph. My family has always looked forward to leaving Florida during the torrid summer months. It is a tremendous relief to get out of the heated hustle and bustle of summer living in Florida. Each summer, we follow the yellow brick road to our hometown in upstate New York. Every sentence here has a strong description. This is what makes a descriptive essay very interesting to read, but also very difficult to write. Reason being, excuse me, it's interesting to read because when you read it, you're able to actually imagine what's going on. You should be able to re-experience exactly what the writer is talking about. There should be no gaps. There should be no questions about what kind of experience that person is having. You should be able to imagine, just as they can imagine in their own head, how this traveling, how this journey is going to occur. Also, another thing that I want to mention here is that this person decides to use an analogy. They use the words yellow brick road. Now, if any of you guys have actually seen the old Judy Garland movie, The Wizard of Oz, this is something that's very important that can only be understood if you know about that movie, or perhaps say Wicked. That would be another, Wicked the musical being another substitute for this. You won't know what they mean when they say yellow brick road unless you've seen the movie or have understood it as perhaps a way to get home. Because in the film, the main character, Dorothy, follows the yellow brick road in order to find the wizard and get back home. This is a road that actually leads her back home one day, and so in the same way, the writer is talking about how their family is taking that same yellow brick road to go back home. And again, this is only something you would understand if you have the memory of watching the movie or understanding it first and foremost. And that is why it is a deceptively difficult essay to write, because for a lot of us, English as second language learners, we don't have a lot of these in our tool belt. We can't really pull these out the way that native writers can. And so that is why it's very difficult for Korean writers, for anybody who's not a native speaker, to write a descriptive essay in another language. As we drive through state after state, it becomes apparent that the world around us is changing. In South Carolina, we already begin to notice changes. The trees appear to be touchable, offering soft, plush leaves which sway in the breeze, and the grass actually invites us to share its place rather than scaring us away with mounds of intruding fire ants. So here, I think this is a quite beautiful paragraph. I think this is a quite beautiful way of writing this sequence because they are using a lot of personification. Now, personification gives the impression that the state is welcoming the writer, which is accepting, open, welcoming, inviting. We've seen these words, we can understand it. But personification, for those who might not be familiar with the term, personification is when you give an inanimate object or something that is not human characteristics. And so what I mean by that is, there are trees that appear to be touchable, offering soft, plush leaves which sway in the breeze. How can a tree offer something soft? How can they offer something? A human or person can offer perhaps a stick of gum, a glass of water. People can offer things, but how can a tree offer things? In that way, when we're personifying something, we actually understand it to have more than just the face value meaning behind it. We have the emotion that is attached to it. And that's why personification here is incredibly important. Also down here as well, grass actually invites us. Grass cannot physically invite, but it does, because that's the emotion that we're trying to put into it. Scaring us away, that's not what they're doing, but scaring us away, grass cannot scare you away. So in the same way, we have personification over and over and over again about nature. Nature is being personified, and in that way, we have this relationship with this sequence right now that, okay, it's beautiful, it's warm, it's welcoming, it's inviting. So what does that mean for the writer? They felt very comfortable. They felt happy. This was a good experience, and this was a pleasurable experience for them. As each state brings new surroundings, our anticipation builds, and the home seems closer all the time. Leaving the flatlands and entering an area where we are suddenly surrounded by hills of purple and blue are by far the most awakening moments. Descriptive essays can also describe emotions or thoughts. This is another thing that we're going to be discussing in the next descriptive essay more specifically. But for now, we just want to talk about this statement in particular. What kind of image does purple and blue conjure? Hills of purple and blue. If you guys have ever gone on a really long road trip or have visited America and you've driven through the States, you'll know what they mean when they say hills of purple and blue, because there are mountains far away that you'll be able to see in the distance, and that creates an atmosphere of perhaps distance. In another way, you can also say it's a form of longing because they're so far away, you want to get closer. And so by having this kind of description here, we have a sense of, wow, this is a really long journey. This is really far away. And this is not something that is easily stated, because if you do state it, it gets boring. But if you tell it like this, if you show it like this, then suddenly the experience becomes much more interesting, and we all, as readers, can see this actually occurring in real time. Third paragraph. Virginia and Pennsylvania offer brilliant scenery with majestic hills and checkerboard farmlands. As we descend through the curves and winds of the northern region of the United States, home is now very close. We are almost there. Parallel structure, adjective. So adjective, noun, adjective, noun, adjective, noun. And here, something interesting is that they are described with abstract descriptions, abstract adjectives with an easily understood noun. So scenery, hills, and farmlands, we have an idea of what that is. We know exactly what they might look like. We can imagine them just as is. But what's interesting is that this writer adds adjectives that are abstract. So what I mean by abstract is something that's a thought, something that's an idea, rather than something tangible or something that we can actually see. For instance, brilliant. It's brilliant scenery. And now we are on to our book report section. Now this is going to be our last section of this first series. So let's take this a bit slow and let's understand exactly what a book report is, because this is going to be one of those essays that you will be assigned quite often. So let's just clear things up for today. We do have an essay, but this is quite a short one. So 225 words, 3 paragraphs long, and written in the first and second person perspective. This book report is on the book Frankenstein's Cat Cuddling Up to Biotech's Brave New Beasts by Emily Anthes. Here, this is a very short essay. However, let's spend more time talking about what a book report is, what's essential when we're talking about writing one in particular, and let's try to figure out the mechanics of it first before we get into it any further. Also, this is not clearly a good book report because it's only 225 words. If you guys have picked up on anything so far, an essay around 500 to 600 words is probably the one that you want to be writing as well, regardless of what the essay might be. So here, 225 words, quite short, but I think it's a good way to start because we can fix a lot of things on the way to creating a 10 out of 10 book report essay, which we will discuss later on. And in doing so, we have time to figure out what things we need to actually fix in regards to grammar, as well as aspects that are very particular to the book report itself. A little bit of background on the essay itself and the book. This is a book that was published on January 3rd, 2013, and it is a humorous approach to the advancement of biotech in a way that is easy to understand for many students. So this is a book that is often, I'll say, suggested to readers in middle school or lower high school. The reason why it's a good book is because it's an interesting, fun way to understand something that's quite difficult and hard to understand. And usually these books have a lot of popularity for middle school and high school students. Now, you might have an inkling of a thought of, wait a second, so if we're talking about middle and high school essay writing, which you guys probably are doing right now, well, what about required readings? Won't we have required readings as well? And what about book reports for that? Well, lucky for you guys, I will be discussing some required readings that do happen to be assigned often in middle school and high school courses. And so, in a way, we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We're going to be talking about books as well as how we can write book reports on said books. But first, let's talk more about the book report itself. It requires writers to talk about a book and its components, so setting, characters, plot, themes, etc. You guys get the gist. When we're talking about a book as a whole, there are certain things that we want to mention. What do we mention? Any of these things. There's probably more out there as well. We can also talk about literary devices, etc. This is one of the most common essays you will write because there are many reasons we assign this as teachers. There's a reason why it's important we write this. Because first off, I know you guys might not like it, but it is to check to see if you did your homework. Yes, we give you assigned readings and we might give you pop quizzes, but another way we can check it is just by asking you, hey, write an essay for me on the book. It also checks your analytical skills. So more specifically, if you're talking about themes or characters or settings, then in those instances, you might be talking more about seeing, how well can this student analyze, say, symbolism within this book? Little bit complicated. We're going to get there one day. Don't worry about that. But it's another reason why we do assign them. Then gives you an opportunity to reflect on the content of the essay and respond to the themes as you desire in a paragraph. So here in this last statement, it's important that when we are reading a book, we don't just read it and then put it to the side, but we reflect on what we read. It's important that we reflect because what is the purpose of learning? It's to read something, to understand something, and then expect that information to be reflected in our day-to-day lives. And so it's important that we have the opportunity to do so. And how do we do it? Through a book report. In a book report, it's also very essential that we mention the following few points. Here, this is more of a technicality rather than this is just something that you absolutely need to do in regards to content. When I say content, I'm talking about the book's content. So say, for instance, the characters, the plots. It's more important that we talk about just the technicalities of it. So we need the title of the book. If we don't know what book you're talking about, then there's no point in writing a book report. Same thing goes for the author, because we need to have proof of who wrote it, and also we want to give credit. Who's the author that wrote this book that you took your time out of your day to read? Also, we want to mention the publishing date or the publishing year if we can't find the exact date. Like for instance, for this book, I was able to find the exact date and month, but for some books that are older, you might just be able to find a month or a year instead, which is perfectly fine. You want to be able to sprinkle that in here or there, and sometimes this is optional, but it's also another point that we do want to keep in mind. Also, we want to talk about main characters, because every single narrative or every single novel usually has a main character. Then talk about a plot summary, setting, time, and place. Here, setting and time and place, this is important because a lot of times students forget that setting is not just a place, but it is also an era, a time period. Out of these though, if we're to say, okay, this is the one thing that you absolutely need, regardless of whatever book it is that you're writing, this is the stuff that you absolutely need. Title, author, and plot summary, those three are perfectly fine. If you can add the other ones, by all means, I would say you should. However, if you can't find anything else, if the book is a textbook, for instance, which we will be discussing later, then there are no characters. So what do? We don't mention any characters, and we just talk about the title, the author, and the plot summary. Often covered in the introduction paragraph as well, this is information that we immediately know right off the bat when we are talking about the essay and the book in the book report. So this is not something that's going to happen in the body paragraph. This comes straight out the gate. This is the first thing we learn about you writing your book report. This has to be in your introduction, okay? We'll see how that works later on in better essays, but for now, that's what we want to remember. There are also three main types of book reports, and so here I'm going to break it down. There are three main ones that you will be assigned. Depending on what grade you're in, you might see one more often than the other. So for instance, let's just break this down together. Plot summary. This is probably going to be the one that we see a lot in middle school. For all you middle school students out there, this is the one you will be most likely assigned. That doesn't mean you won't get these, but this is the one that you will most likely get assigned. Go through the plot of the story and explain it to the reader in your own words. Think of it as an extended summary. You read it, you talk about it, but you also talk about it in your own words. That's what a plot summary is. Then we have character analysis. This is a bit more difficult. Examine a character's traits and personality and support with quotations from the book. So character analysis is, of course, as it states, you take a character from the book and then you talk about what kind of character they are. Are they a protagonist? Antagonist? Are they flat? Are they static? Are they active? What kind of character are they? And then that is your essay. You center it around one or two people. Lastly, we have a theme analysis. This is going to be for our high school students, most likely. You guys up in your final 3 years of school or secondary education, this is where you're going to be struggling here. The theme analysis, okay? So take the main theme or the purpose of the story and analyze it with proof taken straight out of the book itself. This is the most difficult one out of these three, but don't worry, this is probably going to be easy for you too, as long as you keep reading your books and you do your homework in regards to understanding book reports. So let's go over this essay together. It's going to go quite fast, but I think we'll be able to do it just fine. I appreciated Frankenstein's cat's fascinating explanation about the often baffling subject of bioengineering and its sister sciences. Emily Anthony explains the many sides of today's modern technology, such as gene modification, cloning, pharmaceutical products from the farm, prosthesis, animal tag and tracking, and gene cryogenics. Here, there is a lack of hook and a standalone introduction paragraph, and that is a little bit disheartening because we do, want to have some kind of a hook. However, it's excusable sometimes in book reports the more higher up you get because you don't have time for a hook, and you would much rather just talk about the book itself. And also, there is no standalone introduction paragraph because we only practically have 3 body paragraphs, and so that's just an overall oversight that we have for this essay. Also, in regards to the title, author, and summary that I mentioned earlier, or summary being, of course, our little plot summary, we have the statement here, we have the author here, and then we have the general summary of what's going on in this book. However, the title of the book should be written in full. Now, I know that the title of the book was quite long, but that is still the title of the book, and you don't want to shorten it just yet. Just like with other words and other statements, you want to be able to write everything out first before we shorten them out and have something stand in its place. So for instance, in the very introduction paragraph, you want to write the entire title out, and afterwards you can refer to Frankenstein's cat as a title. Also, another thing that I want to mention here, you might see the little parentheses down there, quotations, question mark. When we have a title of a book or a novel, we want to put it in quotation marks so we can differentiate.